So I just wanted to just go back to the Radon photograph, because I did want to just make a couple of points about that particular application, and I accept every application obviously is going to be different. Bear with me. Right, this was an application for an NAD plant that was going to receive waste from the brewery in Adnams, so it should smell quite nice. It was going to take liquid waste from the brewery. It was also going to take food waste from Adnams and associated businesses from the local community. It was obviously going to take some waste from further afield. But it was in the AOMB, it was in the area of outstanding natural beauty, it was in the open countryside, and there are quite strong policies in terms of trying to protect those areas from development. But when we started looking at this is in an old quarry, it's in an old mineral working, and it's actually in the area of the old plant, and the site was never restored back to full ground level, so it actually had natural advantages in terms of being set below the ground. So when we looked at it, in landscape terms, it actually was having no impact whatsoever, helped by the fact that the District Council had recently granted planning permission and there'd been a storage building, the new storage building had been built nearby. But the other advantages are that it's very close to a gas pipeline, so it is going to be injecting gas into the gas, so it will be a biomethane plant, so that was very good. They're also talking about potentially using the biomethane to fuel their fleet of vehicles at some time in the future, so again a very strong positive in that respect. Access was directly onto an A-class road, already had access for HGV traffic, so that worked very well indeed. So when we looked at it, really the only reason, if we were looking for reasons to refuse, would be that it might be the policy in respect of its landscape setting. And when we got the responses back from the statutory consultees, there was not one objection from those bodies, even though you might have expected them to be the strongest custodians of that designation. So we went ahead and approved it, and it's now up and running. It's not fully operational, but it is running. And I think it just goes to show that a properly prepared application with all the positives elaborated, planning authorities I think will be receptive to those types of proposals. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. It was a very encouraging statement. And it's the more encouraging given that there are actual buildings to prove it, which I've always felt better than this is the policy, because sometimes the policy and the practice don't hang together quite so much as we'd like it to do. Well, now let's move on to the question of permits, and we're very lucky to have Howard Lieberman, Senior Advisor of the Industry Regulation for the Environment Agency, who has been not only invited, but it appears set up for this next speech. Harold.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The message that I've taken from this morning is must do better. But I'd actually like to explain what we've actually done in that must do better bit to dispel with some of the myth of what people think we do from what we actually do. And so what I'm going to do is give you a canter through the regulatory framework, all of course framed by the law, which is a given, unless there's a change in the law, and that rests with government. And we have actually recognised where some changes would be very beneficial whilst maintaining protection of the environment. Of course, that's what we're all about. AD comes with risks. AD has an impact. And we manage those risks, and it's recognised through the regulatory framework. So what I'm going to do is explain why we regulate you and what we regulate. And if you're in the business of anaerobic digestion and you're taking in waste materials, then you will be regulated. Now, straight away, I've mentioned the word waste materials, because if you're taking in energy crops, unlike our planning colleagues, we don't regulate you. So that's the first thing to note. If it's just energy crops that you're taking in, non-waste materials, then actually we're not interested in what you do. Unless, of course, there's a pollution incident in which we will investigate under other regulatory powers. Now, we also recognise, whilst on the topic of energy crops, that a lot will be seeding with a waste material. And we think that seeding is not in itself enough to bring you into regulation. So what we have is a regulatory position statement, one of many which deal directly with anaerobic digestion, which says if you seed with a waste, then we will not regulate you, assuming, of course, that you're taking in non-waste materials as your main feed. Seeding is time limited. If you're going to seed for the next 6 years, we probably won't accept that. But if you're going to seed over a period of a few months or so, then we will accept that. So, waste feed materials going in, we will regulate you under the environmental permitting regulations. And although the EPR has been around for some time, in terms of our approach, that's only been around since April of last year, 2010. That was a step change in the way that we regulated the industry. That was where we tried to introduce the concept of light touch regulatory approach. So in answer to the gentleman of when we are actually going to do it, well, it's been around for some time and there's still lessons to be learned, and we're still moving the way that we deal with this particular area. So we have 3 ways for AD: exemptions, which I'll take you through, standard rules and permits, and then into the Rolls-Royce of regulatory approach, our bespoke permits. We regulate you either as a waste activity or what I would call an IPPC activity. That stands for Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control. It's a directive from the EU which sets out very, very clearly the processes which are subject to, if you like, a holistic approach to environmental regulation, air, land and water, with statutory consultation periods that we must run, a whole raft of information that we must go through and must pursue before we are able to issue a permit. So there's 2 distinct ways of dealing with this: waste activities, IPPC activities, through these 3 approaches. So let's look at the exemptions. As I say, they were introduced in April of last year, and they deal with the very, very small players. We don't stop you from doing what you want to do. But what you do as you increase in the range of waste that you take in, the size of your AD facility that you have, the size of your combustion plant, that increases the risk and it requires more work from the Environment Agency. And as part of that, you move through the tiers of the light touch approach towards bespoke. So T24 and T25, exemptions set out in regulation, pick up on-farm and off-farm AD. They're aimed at the very, very small player. And so if we look at the on-farm, we have a capacity of 1250 metres cubed, capacity of the anaerobic digester itself, not the capacity of the upstream storage facility, and not the capacity of the downstream digester facility, storage of the digestate facility. It is the digester itself. And if you're under 1250, and if your associated combustion plant is under 0.4 megawatt thermal input, then actually the exemption applies. And I'll tell you what the implications of that are in a moment. For, if you like, off-farm AD, the risks are different if you start to increase the range of wastes that you want to take in from manures and slurries. And so the storage limit, or the digester limit, drops to 50 metres cubed, but still an associated 0.4 megawatts thermal input for your combustion plant. That's a reflection of the types of waste, and of course with these waste streams, the biogas generation from those is greater. If you are lucky enough to be able to go down the exemption route, all you need to do is to go on our website and just read the guidance. It's always worth knowing what you're signing up to do. And it just sets out a range of very, very light touch principles which we expect you to follow. And if you're in the business of AD, you'll be doing it anyway. Download our exemption form, fill it out, email it to us. That's it. You're on our books, nothing else. Registration is free, and there's no subsistence costs. That's the light touch approach for the very small AD facilities. Moving from that, we go on to the standard rules and the permits. And the standard rules are a series of requirements that if you can meet, you can go down this particular route. In setting out those standard rules, we've already consulted with our statutory consultees such as the Natural England and the Countryside Commission for Wales and other bodies. And between all the risks that we've identified and how we've managed those risks, we've come up with a series of rules. So it's far less time consuming because you can see up front what we are about. The risk assessment, etc., has already been prepared. The requirements are set out. And there's a very, very reduced application fee because we don't need to do too much in the determination process. And it's far quicker to get hold of those standard rules permits as well. So we've got 3 sets. We've actually got 4 sets. The 4th applies to sewage works. And unless there's water utility companies in the audience, I'm not going to get drawn on that at the moment. But I'm happy to discuss it outside of the room. But we've got 3 key rules. We've got ones for on-farm, primarily taking manures and slurries. One for off-farm, a wider range of wastes, recognising that off-farm can take these wastes as well and apply for an off-farm standard rule permit. And we've got the storage of the waste digestate itself at some distance away from the facility. So the restrictions, the thresholds of those standard rules are set out below. We've got a throughput of 75,000 tonnes per year. Now this is actually quite a sizable facility. The thermal input of the associated combustion plant, 3 megawatts, and the 3 megawatts actually ties neatly in with the 75,000 tonne throughput. They are directly related. And then there's a whole host of rules which set out distance limits to things like residential buildings, public buildings, other dwellings, to water courses, abstraction points. And it's those specific rules that some operators fall foul of, which they can't comply. And all it means is, if you can't comply with this screening approach, then you move from the standard rules to the next level of assessment. It doesn't stop you what you're doing, but what we have to do is assess your application quite carefully. We are obliged to talk to our statutory consultees to make sure that they're on board, and we do this before we issue the permit. But if everything's right, you'll still get a permit. For on-farm, the application fee is just over £1,500 and the subsistence fee is £510. For off-farm, recognising there's a greater range of wastes, that increases to around about £2,500 with a subsistence fee of £700. Now, for the standard rules, we're talking about plant with investment at the low end of the millions or hundreds of thousands. Now, this application fee of £1,500, in my view, is not going to be a barrier, but I do stand to be corrected there. We have the standard rules, and we've lived with them for a year, and we've just gone out to consultation to try and change those standard rules, to actually relax them further and open them up to a wider range of operators. And what we've proposed to do is to remove some of the distance limits or reduce them, change some of the thresholds, increase the threshold from 75,000 to 100,000, just open them up. Now, as part of the process of the standard rules, if there is a change, I have to go out to consultation. That's a legal obligation. And once I finish that consultation, then I have to write a consultation response, which sets out, in response to everything we've received, why we're doing what we're doing. So I will respond to all those points that are raised. And I'm about to put the full stop to that consultation document, and it will be published in the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. Once it's published, I am then obliged to give operators that hold a permit 3 months notification before they come into effect. So even though I might be doing things that are actually beneficial and will be welcomed by the sector, I still have to follow this process because it works both ways. I might actually decide to tighten some of those limits. All of this is evidence-backed. And I have to bring on board the statutory consultees in actually progressing some of this. So, in terms of expectation management, the distance limits to ecological sites, I'm not going to relax at this moment in time, because I have to refer all our modelling evidence and the deposition evidence onto our statutory consultees. And I'm going to do this via an